we're happy to bring on this next guest here. I know the Vikings side of things might not be what the Lions fans have interest in here, with the fact that it was a loss. I think Mick, this is our first time that the Vikings have won since we've been doing this segment, which is kind of wild because they won a ton of games here since we've been doing this. But this is your go-to folks. These are your go-to folks for Vikings coverage, the Purple Persuasion. They do a great show here, and I appreciate you joining us, Mick. Sorry the Holes aren't here, so you have to deal with me, but at least you had a win to deal with.
Hey, there's worse things that could happen, right, Ryan? Happy to be back again. So, and you're right, it's the first time they've won, so it's a different experience.
Yeah, you get to gloat a little bit, but we got to start out with the question of the day, because maybe it's a little different over there in Minnesota. It's National Nachos Day, so I'm curious about when you're settling in for the game, you're getting ready to watch the Minnesota game. What's Mick's favorite football snack for the Vikings game?
That one's kind of tough. Probably just a homemade pizza. My wife makes fantastic pizzas, so whatever kind of pizza she's throwing together, whether it's pepperoni, she makes a great cheeseburger pizza. Another one, she makes like this stinging honey garlic pizza. That's fantastic too. So yeah, pizza's probably it for me.
Oh, you're fancy over there, Mick. You're eating homemade pizza. That's pretty good. We've had things like jalapeno poppers and wings so far as answers, and nachos actually was one of the answers. So that's fancy. I like it. You're living it up over there.
You're not missing with homemade pizzas for sure.
No, that's a good one. That's a good pick. But I'm glad to have you guys on the show. We missed you last week. We had a little bit of a conflict there time wise with Justin. But I had these notes from the preview, but it was just interesting. Now this conversation is a little bit different. But one of the things that I wanted to talk to you guys about before the game is I was curious about your perspective of the quarterback situation, because obviously that didn't go to plan. You couldn't plan on the McCarthy injury again, but there was a point there where you guys had Darnold, you had picked up Jones, obviously JJ was on the injured list, and then you got rid of those two guys who have gone on to Seattle and Indianapolis respectively and done very well. And Kevin O'Connell, I've said this before on the show, he's the guy that I would go to play for. No offense to Dan Campbell. I love Dan Campbell. But if I was a quarterback, because I think he does the most with quarterbacks. But Wentz didn't seem like a good fit to me. And I'm curious what your guys' perspective was on it, because I felt like they were trying to get rid of anybody that could seem like competition for J.J. McCarthy. It seemed like they were trying to make sure that there wasn't really a controversy there, that there was a clear backup to J.J. McCarthy who was going to be the incumbent starter once he got off his injury. Is that the feeling you guys got, or is it just, hey, we couldn't pay Darnold and Jones was going to go elsewhere, and so this is what we ended up with?
I think as far as the team is concerned, I don't think Sam Darnold really, as being a top pick, kind of like Daniel Jones was, kind of like J.J. McCarthy was. You know, they know the situation when they're coming in. So I feel like Darnold knew his time was going to be limited in Minnesota, so he capitalized and turned that into his next opportunity. I think Daniel Jones kind of felt the same way, where he smelled some blood in the water in Indianapolis, and he took a little bit less on the deal to go play against, try and beat on Anthony Richardson for the starting job in the Colts, and lo and behold, he did. As far as McCarthy goes, they brought in Howell, who, you know, he's a backup QB, and they got rid of him before the season started and brought in Carson Wentz, who was supposed to be just that veteran stopgap, you know, the old guy in the room, and he played a lot more games than anybody wanted to see. But as far as competition for J.J. McCarthy, I think in the grand scheme of things, you bring in a top 10 quarterback. Are other teams bringing in competition to beat out their top 10 starting or their top 10 pick quarterbacks?
No, definitely not. And that's why I thought, okay, this is a clear strategy from them, because it does get confusing. I mean, sure, that situation in Indianapolis is a great story with Daniel Jones, but there's another side to that, and that's the side you pointed out, Mick, the Anthony Richardson side of things, that right now is a failure on the organization's part. Doesn't mean it can't turn around, but is that a guy that's going to stay, because now you've got Jones in the mix, and are you going to trade? They've now basically traded a situation. It's kind of like Minnesota and Indianapolis traded the quarterback situations. Now Minnesota's doubling down on their newer quarterback that they invested in, and Indianapolis is saying, wait a minute, let's bring in competition, and now they have kind of a Darnold McCarthy situation developing with Jones and Richardson there. So it's a good point by you, Mick, that can create, there's a reason that they call it a QB controversy, because it does get controversial if it plays out a certain way.
Oh, absolutely. And it's like I said, I think Daniel Jones smelt the blood in the water. He had seen that through 2 years, Anthony Richardson had trouble staying healthy, playing the type of football he did, where J.J. McCarthy was out all last year because of the torn meniscus. And whether someone in the organization told him or he just, he's been around the block, he knew that this was going to be a clearly backup role with no chance to usurp McCarthy as the starting quarterback. Now, had he decided differently, would we be having? Would there have been a different quarterback playing against the Lions? I don't know. I mean, if all things would have played out the same and the high ankle sprain and Daniel Jones comes in and plays lights out like he has in Indianapolis, there could be an entirely different storyline going on. Right now, we don't have to deal with that. We got the Carson Wentz experience. Carson Wentz apparently wasn't a scholar at the Kevin O'Connell quarterback school, and he just stayed as even keel as a backup. And J.J. McCarthy came in and made some excitement for us.
He brought a lot of excitement for sure, and that's what I was trying to tell the folks on this side of things, because there was a lot of attention paid, and rightfully so, to the injuries that the Lions were dealing with, but the Vikings were dealing with a ton of key injuries and people being out. You obviously had Addison out the first few games because of the suspension. Then McCarthy is out for a good stretch. Dara saw a bunch of issues with the offensive line there, and Van Ginkel is a very important piece. Basically, most of those reinforcements came back by the Lions week, and you saw the team that everybody said, hey, wait a minute, let's not forget about them. This team was 14-3 last year. They got a quarterback that could be pretty productive. They invested some of that money in their trenches, which is usually a good strategy that Lions fans can understand. And now I'm curious what you think, Mick, as somebody that covers the Vikings, of what this division looks like, because it's very tight now, and there's not an obvious front runner. The Packers, we'll see if Love holds up. They had a key injury at tight end there. The Lions have been dealing with their injuries, and they're in the pack. The Bears are surging a little bit, and the Vikings, even though they've been tracking from behind, they've got their team back to a degree, and I think they could go on a little bit of a run here.
It's one game at a time, and it's funny that you bring up Van Ginkel, because it made me think of last year when Week 18, when the Lions and the Vikings played, and Anzalone came back and he had that monster game. It was almost like the reverse of it, and it just it just popped up in my head and made me chuckle. As far as the North goes, like talking with Justin about it, and we've had the same opinion all year, is that it's going to be a slobber knocker for everybody. The Bears are on the ascent. And that Tucker Kraft injury in Green Bay is really that hurts Green Bay's chances. Detroit's still playing good football, and as far as Vikings goes, they have a solid roster. It's really dependent upon what they're going to get out of the quarterback position and how much the offense can help the defense stay off the field, because the defense has been playing pretty well, but it's the offensive side of the ball that has kind of been putting them in precarious situations. So if they can operate like they did last year, where they were able to get up a score, 2 scores, then the defense and Brian Flores, they can do different things to create some chaos. With the Vikings having 2 wins on the road in the division, I think that's going to go a long way, because when you can get and steal those road games, especially in the division, that makes when you're coming back home that much easier, because you're going to have Detroit coming to try and take a game for you. You're going to have Chicago coming to try and take a game for you. It's going to come down to the wire, I think, in the North.
I agree, and it makes me think of complementary football, what you're talking about with the offense and defense. That's a popular phrase here in Detroit. And the other name that I think is an important piece of this team, we talked about him a little bit last year with the transition to him, but Aaron Jones being back, obviously he then was out again. I don't know his status, but him coming back and giving that that partner in crime to Mason there, I feel like they can be very complementary to each other in that running game.
I think we got to see what they had been practicing this offseason with it, because that was the most complimentary they had played all season. Now, Jones has been out with injury. He was put on IR, but coming back, I think he had 9 rushes for 78 yards before he went out. I think he had AC sprain or something with the AC joint in his shoulder there. But he had a big game, and Mason was not running the ball anywhere near as well as Jones was.
Jones, I've always been a big fan of. I felt like, I know they were looking at an upgrade there in Green Bay with Jacobs, and we've talked to Jacob Westendorf, who's been on the show multiple times as well, who covers the Packers for us in this segment. I feel like Jones has been undervalued wherever he's been. They always tried to pair him with somebody in Green Bay, and now that he has a proper pairing in Minnesota, I feel like that could be strong here down the stretch for Minnesota, because I think you're right. I mean, I remember talking to Rob Huff, who covers the Bears for us at the beginning of the season, and I felt like I could have said this to any of you guys, that because he was a little bit down on the Bears, they had lost to the Vikings with that big J.J. McCarthy comeback the first week, and then obviously lost the Lions, but they've been looking good since. And I remember saying before the Lions game, I could see this team literally being first or last in the NFC North. And I just think the margins are getting very thin here in general, where I think they're, some being more likely than others, but I think there's a scenario where the 1 through 4, I think any combination of the teams in existence could happen with different likelihoods.
Oh, without a doubt. I think the way it ends up in the North is they're only going to be separated by a couple of wins. I don't think we're going to have any 4 or 5 win teams in the North this year. I think it's going to be, everyone will be above that 8 to 11, 12 wins, and someone's going to squeak out. And if we can put 2 teams in the playoffs, we'll do it. But I just think that the competition level has gotten so much tighter this year over the past 5 years. When Detroit was trying to get back together with it. The Vikings had their down years. The Bears seem to always have down years, but they've been all right. And it's tightened up, and this is the kind of football we get lucky to see, because we could be in one of those worst divisions out there. And I'll take this, where we beat each other up and steal the away games when you can. Exactly.
And the one thing that kind of played out differently than what I saw, I thought the North was going to be close. This is playing out much like I thought. I didn't necessarily think the AFC North was going to be as easily handled by the NFC here, because I felt like with the Steelers and the Ravens, that was a strong division, I thought, at the beginning of the year, and that's been a lot more middling than I thought. So the schedule strength hasn't been quite as strong, but it's still one of the toughest schedules. The NFC North has a very tough collective schedule, not only playing each other, but what they've drawn in these other divisions here.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, it helps when you don't have to go against Joe Burrow, because if Joe Flacco's putting up the numbers like that in that offense, you got to wonder what Joe Burrow would be doing. So that's always going to be a bonus. The Vikings are going to get Lamar Jackson this week, and he looked pretty good last week. That defense is on the rise, and it says something about the team when they're 1-5 and they're still favored to win that division. I mean, Aaron Rodgers is Aaron Rodgers, and we've watched Aaron Rodgers do Aaron Rodgers things for the last 15 years, and you keep seeing it, and you're like, well, when is this guy going to run out of this magic? And he just keeps doing it over and over again. But in Cleveland's Cleveland, so it's not the AFC South like it was last year, where those were just free wins for everybody. But we're getting the tougher games now that we're getting into November, December.
This will be an interesting stretch for all the NFC North teams. I'm curious what you saw, because I was like getting the perspective from you guys on the Lions. Obviously, that wasn't the best played game on the Lions side, and we talked about that with Jeremy Reisman in the previous segment, and then Shane Graham earlier in the show. But I'm curious kind of what stuck out to you from the Lions side of things, and from what the Vikings were able to do to the Lions.
Well, the way they controlled the run, I think that the way that they were able to use like Eric Wilson, I don't think the Lions were ready for that, because they were able to take Gibbs out of the game, and Gibbs has been such a Viking killer the last. We were 1-5 in the Kevin O'Connell regime against the Lions, and Gibbs has been pretty much a factor in most of those games. He's just he's been a force, and it is what it is. But I think with Eric Wilson being used like he wasn't Ivan Pace and he wasn't Dallas Turner, but Eric Wilson is a solid linebacker. He was a great signing this offseason, and I just don't think the Lions and John Morton were ready for him.
I'm glad you brought him up because he's been a revelation. I was surprised to see. I know he's kind of bounced around, but I feel like you guys have to be surprised with his performance. I know he's solid, but this can't be what they or you expected heading into camp here.
No, I envisioned he was probably going to be a special teams guy, but he's really stepped in the role when Cashman was out. And he made a big impression, and he's always been a decent linebacker. But given the Flores system and Ivan Pace's history in it, the common thought was that Ivan Pace Jr. was going to continue on. But Wilson has come in and essentially usurped. He's been a great wingman to Blake Cashman out there, and even in the Detroit game, he had taken a lot of snaps. He was rushing the passer, he was rushing up the middle, and that's stuff you would have thought Dallas Turner would have been doing, but it was Eric Wilson that was doing it.
They've got a lot of versatile pieces on that defense. It's a good defense. Obviously, Flores manages it very well. So I'm curious what you think of. We're going to have you guys back on the show for the next matchup with the Lions and the Vikings. But how do you see things looking when we get back together for that game? Where do you see the teams being at, and where do you see this thing finishing? I know you talked about not being a big margin between kind of the top and bottom team, but how do you see things slotting here?
I think Detroit has a really interesting set of games between now and when they play the Vikings again, especially because they're going to have to go to U.S. Bank Stadium. But they're going to play the Commanders should be like the easiest game right now for probably the rest of the season. But that murderer's row of the Eagles and the Giants have been looking pretty good. They have an insane defensive line. Then you're gonna have the Packers and the Cowboys who can't play defense, but their offense is going to just put up points. That's just what they do. The Rams is probably the best team in the NFC right now. The Steelers are. I don't know where they're going to be, but that's a bit of a gauntlet. A lot of it's at home for you, which is nice. But I still think that's a tough group of games there. But going to Philly is always tough. As far as the Vikings go, it's one game at a time. You got a quarterback who started 3 games. He's 22 years old. He's getting his feet wet in the league, and you got teams we're going to have to go through a couple North opponents. We're going to have to go out to Seattle, and then we get to play the Commanders. And fortunately, Jaden Daniels is out, but it's just one of those, you got to deal with it. So they got the Commanders and the Cowboys, and then they play the Giants. And like I said, the Giants they've been fun to watch this year. It's too bad what happened to Scatterbo out there.
I felt like he was really coming on. I know the Lions weren't interested in a running back, but he would have been a perfect fit for them at running back. I was surprised he went so low there, but yeah, I think that you got a collective groan from the Lions fans here when you said the Rams being the best team in the NFC, but they are sneaking through right now, and Stafford's looking great, and they're kind of sneaking through everybody's radar, I feel like, to a degree, but great stuff. We appreciate you joining us. We'll look forward to talking with you prior to and after the next matchup with the Vikings, but tell people where they can follow you guys for all the great Vikings coverage in between here.
We are at TPP Skol, the TPP Skol on X, Twitter. That's where we do the vast majority of everything. If you want to find us, we'll be there.
It's great stuff, and they've been growing since we've been talking to them on the show. Not that it has anything to do with the show, but because they've been growing and doing good stuff, their following is growing. So be sure to jump on that train there and follow their coverage for counter intel purposes or whatever purposes you have there. But be sure to follow them, and we appreciate you joining us, Mick, and we'll talk to you before the next matchup here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Good luck to you guys, Ryan.
All right, thanks. You too. Thanks to Mick of the Purple Persuasion. We're glad he could join us, and we're going to take a quick break and then close up our first iteration of Shane Graham's Extra Points with Ryan Walsh, presented by Encore Business Group. Stick with us. You're listening to Jethro FM.